He marched along, the sweltering sun, moving towards one of the great battles of the Civil War. Great, as they called them, even though thousands of Americans lost their lives. That was the Civil War. One half of the country against the other. The not-so-United States of America versus the Confederacy of America. The Civil War was a terrible war. It cost many thousands of lives. But the overall effects of the Civil War were primarily brought about by the leaders and their strengths and weaknesses. Lincoln's strengths in his leadership showed that he was ultimately a much better leader and man than Jefferson Davis was. Jefferson Davis was weak, especially in the way that he dealt with his cabinet members and the war. Lincoln was a much more effective leader than Davis, which helped to give the Union an advantage over the Confederacy and overall win them the war. Lincoln's superior knowledge and his ability to act quickly in tense situations gave him an ultimate advantage over Davis, who had trouble making the difficult decisions. Lincoln's decisions in the eyes of his fellow government officials seemed to be rash and unconstitutional, but he held the public support and was popular. Davis had a hard time changing things in his cabinet and military, which ultimately cost the Confederacy the war with his blunders.
Jefferson Davis was a fool that blundered the war, starting with his cabinet. His Vice President Alexander Stephens spent a good majority of the war disagreeing publicly with Jefferson Davis, not the best proverbial first mate on a ship that was barely afloat as it was. Since the South was founded with an emphasis on states' rights, he tried to have some representatives from all the states of the Confederacy. Some complained that there were too many representatives and not enough cabinet members. It didn't help that he was very unpopular with his people, often being out of touch with the public's opinion. He had a large amount of inept military leaders, not the least of which being Beauregard, who was not only a liar, but he was a poor military tactician. He filed a report that claimed he could have driven the Confederate Army straight to Washington after the first Battle of Bull Run, but Davis ordered him not to. Davis did no such thing. This fact that he did not fire him after this shows his weakness. Many generals were kept around even though they did not do much to contribute to the Confederate cause.
We cannot afford to be idle, and though weaker than our opponents in men and military equipments, must endeavor to harass if we cannot destroy them. Robert E. Lee. Jefferson Davis was a fool, to be sure, but we cannot blame the war's outcome completely on him. Much of it goes to the brilliance of Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln was considered a great leader because Lincoln was able to acknowledge potential mistakes and then learn from them quickly. Lincoln exhibited an ability to withstand calamity and move onward. Lincoln's rectitude was tried because of the hard decisions he faced as a leader of the Union. Abraham Lincoln was very aware of his own personal impairments and used them to gain motivation and build strength. Lincoln, through many people's eyes, is seen as exemplifying the worth of integrity and honesty, as well as retaining respect for an individual and human rights. Lincoln's respect for Ulysses had grown through the years 1862 and 1863, but this was before he learned of the Union victory. Lincoln was very well gazed upon as a leader in the North. Every generation had produced a hero, in this case, Abraham Lincoln, thought to be a hero in the North. The North was mostly sought out to be as anti-slavery, and Lincoln was very much so for that cause.
Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down, in honor or dishonor, to the latest generation. Abraham Lincoln. Yes, Jefferson Davis did blunder, to be sure. He had an overpopulated cabinet, he was micromanaging, and, well, let's be frank, his military leaders weren't the greatest. It is not all his fault. Abraham Lincoln was a brilliant man, and he managed to keep public support the whole time, even while making some unconstitutional moves like suspending habeas corpus, and otherwise doing things that were not considered to be correct by the Supreme Court, even though he mainly just ignored them. It was these things that made Lincoln a great leader. And that, my friends, is why the Union won the war.